Hello and welcome to The View from 22. I'm Natasha Feroze, the Spectator's Deputy Broadcast Editor, and today I'm joined by Kellie-Jay Keen, aka Posey Parker. She is the leader of the Party for Women, and Kelly joins me now to discuss the Conservatives' plan to change the Equality Act to define the protected characteristic of sex as biological sex. It spills into single-sex spaces for women. That also spills into women-only teams in sports. Kelly, thank you for joining me on Spectator TV. The Equality Act announcements were made today. It seems like something you've always been in favour of. What did you think of them?
Well, I think it's a pre-election announcement, isn't it? The whole idea that biological sex isn't what is meant by sex in the Equality Act is insane. And I think that is what's wrong with the whole Equality Act, to be honest, that it's a useless piece of legislation that is totally led and superseded by the Gender Recognition Act and the protected characteristic of gender reassignment.
So you think it should be amended?
I personally think it should be scrapped, the whole thing. And I think we should go back to separate acts protecting people with disabilities, I think, more than anybody else. Maybe a Women's Act, maybe even a Men's Act. But an Equality Act that gives protections to people with a legal fiction with sort of a made-up identity that is competing and competes with the category that is supposed to protect women, it just doesn't make any sense. And in the Equality Act, I'm sure it says a woman is a female human or some such thing. And it's the Conservatives that have let it go and let it mean anything. So I don't see why ever any man who calls himself a woman would be protected by the characteristic of sex, meaning female sex, in the Equality Act.
Did you see the Mumsnet manifesto?
I haven't. I've read something about it where they sort of do talk about a woman being an adult human female or some such nebula concept. I got banned from Mumsnet quite a long time ago for the evil that is misgendering and flouting their laws, their rules. And I said about Stella Creasy, my final act was asking Stella Creasy what is a woman. And I said, if she answers this question, I'll drink a bottle of Prosecco through my nose. And that was my final terrible act on Mumsnet.
But it seems like, if that's the case, they've come a long way to now be going with your policy of single-sex spaces, no?
Yeah, but I think, look, I don't know the founders of Mumsnet particularly well, but I suspect that they always thought that. They just had to pretend for a while that they didn't, so that they wouldn't get targeted by trans activists, which is what happened to them with all their advertisers, which is how this sort of authoritarian little cult has worked. So I would imagine that they've just, I don't know. I don't want to blow my own trumpet, but I think I've been partly responsible for shifting the Overton window and pulling it back to some sort of reality. And if they've come along with it and they feel that they can actually use language that means something, then I'm delighted.
So, Kellie-Jay, you are the leader of the Party for Women. And that you've been in the news recently because you are now planning to stand against Jess Phillips.
That might change. The whole point of Party of Women is an extension of the activism that I've been doing for the last 8 years. And it's all about raising the alarm and sort of saying to people, come over here and have a look. The emperor really is naked. And so this really is a furthering of that, rather than I have political ambitions to be, I don't know, the next Thatcher, I think. So that's what it is. So Jess Phillips she's still media friendly. She's been pretty gutless on this, as have had, most MPs have been gutless on this, but Jess Phillips has a particular brand, which is, I'll say anything I will, Bab. And it's sort of working class, feisty. She made her name working in women domestic violence services and so on. And I think she's been quite gutless on this, but she isn't, by any stretch, she's not the only one. She seems a good candidate. But then George Galloway also feels the same. So he's sending one of his people there. And I think the pro-Palestine, anti-Palestine, anti-Israel, Semitism, all of that will will totally overshadow any discussion or attention I want to pour onto women.
I mean, it seems to me like there are far worse offenders of what your campaign poses. For example, the Lib Dems.
The vast majority of people will have the same gender as their biological sex, but a small number won't.
So a woman can have a penis?
Well, quite clearly.
As a Liberal Democrat, I believe that women can have a penis.
Mm.
Are they not the sort of people you should be going after rather than Jess Phillips? She's you obviously don't call yourself a feminist, but she's been a campaigner for women's rights for several years. She has worked in domestic violence. She's continuously called out femicide. Is it really the best thing for you to go against someone who, on a lot of things, you might agree with?
Well, I'm only interested in one thing, and that's that women can be recognised in law and in life as women, adult human females. And I think in particular, because she's been so good on other stuff, it makes everything else that she's ever done look so hollow that she hasn't stepped up on this. So I get the criticism, and if I wasn't a strategic mastermind, I might agree with it. But this is not about tearing down Jess Phillips. This is about forcing Jess Phillips, a woman that we're all very disappointed in, that she hasn't spoke about this. She did include a male 2 years running, the same male, 2 years running in the femicide census that she read out, or the names that she read out on International Women's Day. There was no reason for her to do that, bar scoring some political points. And so I think she should be held to account. In addition, I don't think there's a single woman that's appeared twice on that census, that she's read out twice in the Houses of Parliament. So, yeah, I think the hypocrisy angers me more. The Lib Dems have been really foolish on this, but nobody's interested really in fools. Nobody's making news stories. Ed Davey can fall off a canoe or windsurfing however many times he likes, and that gets about half an hour of news coverage. Whereas I think Jess Phillips will get more, but I have my sights on other candidates, to be honest.
I just want to ask you another question about the Conservative Party, because do you think out of some of the major parties, it would be fair to say they are the closest aligned to your single policy issue, which is protecting women?
I do and I don't. I do in the words that they're saying now. I don't in the fact that they've governed this country since 2010 and they've totally stripped women of their rights. And it's under their watch that men have been allowed into women's prisons, that men have been able to not just attend rape crisis services, but also run them to the detriment of victims who self-exclude. So I don't really think they get off that easy. I don't think anyone is offering the sort of solutions to this issue that I want, which is to repeal the GRA and get rid of the protected characteristic of gender reassignment in the Equality Act.
Do you not think that, given you are extremely influential in your field, lots of women look up to you, do you not think that standing as your own party as a protest vote is almost more damaging? Because if you backed a party, you might not. Lots of people are in political parties where they don't agree with everything that people are saying. But if you could say, actually, this is the party that's closest aligned to my values, I can make a real difference. I mean, you've said so yourself that you're not likely to get elected. This is just a protest vote. But it's kind of tarnishes the point of campaigning and politics, doesn't it?
It's more exciting than a protest vote, to be honest. It's more like a disruptor. We are disruptors. We want to force the conversation. I've gone out in the streets. I've given women a voice. I've created a relatively good amount of news stories. I've shouted from the rafters. And now I feel that this is the next logical step. There's plenty of women shoring up a very comfortable compromise, which I find just unacceptable, and most women that I talk to find unacceptable, and I'm just not willing to do that. And I don't owe any party any particular sort of nod or thank you very much, but I do owe women, and I just think because no party is offering anything to women, I don't see how Labour might completely obliterate everything, but then it's completely broken and it will need rebuilding. And by that, I mean this specific issue that I talk about. And the Conservatives, I think, will do a really passive, meek kind of compromise that leaves us with the same loopholes that can be exploited by not even just nefarious people, but just entitled men calling themselves women and using our spaces. So until we force the conversation and get a proper resolution, I don't actually see that anything could damage women beyond what's already been done.
We had you on Spectator TV with Richard Tice at Christmas time, and it seemed like you two kind of were talking on the same page. You don't see yourself supporting reform?
Well, look, if I didn't have my own party, I'm sure I'd have a really close look at reform. He's a very nice man, but I speak from a woman's perspective, and I hate myself for this. I hate that this is true, but really, we are the only ones that can talk about our perspective with any sort of level of meaning, because often, to some men, the way we feel about stuff and the visceral reaction we have to a man in our space, in our private space, the way we feel about that, I think, is difficult to describe. And yeah, we're more than a token. We're an actual whole thing. So that's why I formed my own party.
Are men allowed in the Party of Women?
They are. I'm not allowed to discriminate under the Equality Act, so they absolutely are allowed in the Party of Women.
You made an interesting call out on your Twitter recently, and this is about schools, education, where you said you asked your followers to send through evidence of captured schools. And by captured, I imagine what you mean is schools that have sort of been sexualizing their curricula. What sort of things have you received since then?
Well, from personal experience, just very quickly, since 2015, dinner staff have been not using the words girl and boy. So this is what's been going on in schools, has been going on for a really, really long time. And I guess those were the primers of sort of pretending that biological sex doesn't exist and all these unisex toilets that our kids have to use. So things like different guidance of saying that if a boy says he's a girl, or rather, if there's a trans girl, so that's a boy who says he's a girl, he should be free to use girl spaces. A lot of policies centered around the confused child, or I would say the coerced and manipulated, groomed child. There's the game of the dice where you make two dice. This is going to be quite explicit. So on the dice, there are the words anus, vulva, penis, mouth, fingers, and digits. And what the children have to do at age sort of 13, 14 is roll the dice and discuss how those two results interact with each other and what you could do. Now, I think that has no place in schools whatsoever. But more than that, I think it blurs a really essential boundary that teenagers have with adults and children have with adults. Now, we know children at that age are discussing quite explicit things, not just because they can have access to the most degrading, vile, violent porn, but also because at that age, that is what they might be discussing. But to do that in front of an adult, I think really erases a very firm and important boundary that we are not supposed to mix adults and children when it comes to that sort of discussion.
If you're a parent and you're thinking about sending your child to school now, do you have access to what sort of sex education they have at the moment?
No, not always. And even worse, right, is teachers will lie. And I used to have a great deal of respect for teachers, and now not so much. I think many of them are cheaper teachers because they're newly qualified. That means they've been groomed at university through their teaching courses, and they've already had the latter stages or the beginning stages of the sort of the cult brainwashing in schools when they were at school. So they're that sort of age. So then what they do is they pass that on, because as far as they're concerned, they have no concept that this might be dangerous or wrong. I think they think they're doing some sort of act of kindness. And there seems to be a prevailing narrative now that schools know better than parents about children, which I find deeply troublesome.
Last question, Kelly. We actually had a video recently. We called it Turf Wars, and it was linked to one of our writers, Debbie Hayton. Debbie is a trans woman and wrote a piece saying that Debbie believes that J.K. Rowling has taken things too far. And that was linked to a few Twitter spats that J.K. Rowling has had recently. And it got very mixed reception from gender critical women. It got an onslaught of criticism, but actually a lot of people came out and said that probably Debbie has a point, and J.K. Rowling is such an influential person, and her tone and her language is actually to her detriment now. I wanted to know what you thought about Debbie's comments.
So I don't think men have any place to tell women how they may or may not speak about the invasion of men into our spaces, including David Hayton, Mr. Hayton, however you want to call him. So I don't think he has any right to say that. Moreover, I'm always quite shocked that he has any voice in this, as I do believe he's a self-invested figure as opposed to someone who genuinely cares about women's rights. So my personal view is that men who have a self-confessed fetish, like AGP, have no place in our schools at all, and certainly have no place in telling someone as wonderful and important as J.K. Rowling how she may or may not talk about any single man or issue that affects women.
But it was surprising because most of the time, Debbie says exactly the same things that all of you say. So Debbie doesn't agree. Debbie thinks that single-sex spaces are important. Debbie doesn't think that people should tell others who their pronouns are. Did need to become such an attack on Debbie?
A man that puts himself out there quite so much in the Times, writing a book about his fetish and about how it impacts his family and how he carried on teaching. I think his shoulders are more than wide enough. I don't buy it that a man is totally on our side while he takes hormones to try to appear as a woman, while he dresses in women's clothing, and while he advocates for himself. It's quite, I don't know why anyone is fooled by it, to be quite honest. It's a really self-invested position that he takes. He uses women's spaces. He asks people to call him by his female name. So as for him being on our side, I don't think he is. I think he's on his own side, and he is a public figure. So, I've learnt quite rapidly that people do have opinions once you stick your neck above the parapet, or once you step into the sort of realm of being a public figure. You are fair game, and he's certainly fair game. And I think he ran the gauntlet, and he gambled that he could have a voice against this very important woman, and I think he lost that bet.
Kellie-Jay Keen, thank you for joining us on Spectator TV.
Thanks so much.